Hi everyone. All right, I'm running late. Let's get started. Okay, we are doing ready, set, ferment. So first off, let's talk about what fermentation is. So in its simplest definition, fermentation is the transformative action of microorganisms, right? And so it's those microorganisms that we're going to set up conditions for that are going to be favorable for the kind of food that we want to eat, that are going to cause this transformation in our vegetables to turn something like cabbage into sauerkraut. So why do we do this? Why do we bother fermenting things? And there's three main reasons for doing this. The first is that it's food preservation, right? So if we were to leave a head of cabbage, it's a really big one, a head of cabbage out on our counter, it would rot eventually, right? And so that's also microorganisms causing that rot, but fermentation is us doing that under controlled circumstances so that we get the microorganisms that we want growing on this to turn it into something that we can eat later on down the road. So food preservation, right? The other thing about fermenting food is that it helps to produce gut-friendly bacteria. So we've all heard of probiotics. This is a way to make your own in your kitchen. And then the last thing, which is my favorite part about this, is that it's a fun way to experiment in the kitchen. And we're going to talk about the ways that you can do that with fermenting as we go along here. So some examples of fermented food. I've already said some, but sauerkraut. Other examples are chocolate. So the cacao pods themselves are actually fermented before they're processed and turned into chocolate. Same with coffee beans are also fermented. Miso paste, fish sauce, tempeh, kombucha, salami, other cured meats. These are all fermented, right? Sauerkraut, kimchi, alcohol, vinegar, dairy products, so things like yogurt and kefir, also bread. Sourdough bread is obviously fermented as well. That's what makes it sour. But tonight we're going to be talking specifically about lactic acid fermentation. This is also called lacto fermentation. And that's because the fermentation itself is carried out by lactic acid forming bacteria, which is where the lacto in that name comes from. Tonight, I'm just going to be saying fermentation. I'm talking about veggie fermentation. So we're not talking about other things like kombucha or making your own salami. Those would be different processes. But tonight, we're going to be just focusing on veggies for the most part. So what can be fermented? And basically anything when it comes to vegetables. There's some exceptions. There's some things that don't work well or don't work well all on their own. So some examples of that would be things like beets, because they have too much sugar in them. Also potatoes and mushrooms and kale. These can be used in small amounts, but they're either going to have a funny texture after you ferment them, or mostly it's a texture thing. With kale, it's going to be kind of a really strong flavor. So obviously things like cabbage works really well, but then there's other things, herbs, radishes. So I've got this really beautiful daikon radish here. Carrots work really well. You can also use things like scallions or onions, leeks work, ginger, garlic, all kinds of different yummy things to add into flavor stuff. I've got some red radishes here as well. And then, oh, I do have an onion. So really you can do all kinds of different things. Cauliflower works well. I do cauliflower florets that I ferment all on their own that are delicious. Okay, so let's talk about the basic overview of fermenting and how you do this. So you're going to chop or grate or somehow cut your vegetables into your desired shape and size. And I joke, but however you put it into your jar is how it comes out. So people ask me, well, how thin should I cut the cabbage? Or how should I cut up the carrots? And the answer is, how do you want to eat them? So whenever the product is finished and you go to eat it, do you want to eat chunks of carrot or do you want to eat shredded carrots? Do you want to eat carrot coins or do you want to eat carrot sticks? And there's not a right answer or a wrong answer. It really comes down to personal preference. So that's true for all of the vegetables that you're going to use. You're going to cut it the way that you want to eat it.
We had a question come up in the chat already for you.
Okay.
Is the lactic acid in fermented food the same or different as lactose in dairy products or lactic acid in dairy products?
Good question.
I know that comes up usually a little bit later, but it's already coming up.
Yeah, great. So lactose, I know it's confusing because the words sound the same and you would think that they're connected, but they're actually not. So lactose is referring to the sugar in dairy products, but lactic acid bacteria that produces lactic acid is something that's different. So same root word, so maybe there is a connection deeper than that, but for our purposes, they are not connected and not the same thing, but good question. Okay, so we're gonna take our vegetables, we're gonna chop them into the size that we want. Next, we're gonna take some salt, and we'll talk more about these steps as we go, but you're gonna take salt and you're gonna salt your vegetables. Then you're gonna firmly pack them into a container of choice. You're going to weigh them down, making sure that everything is completely submerged in the brine that you create. And again, I'll explain what that means. And then we wait, right? So then time is also an ingredient in the process of fermenting. Okay, so let's work backwards here a little bit. So let's talk about brining. And the word brine is really just referring to a salty solution. So there's two main ways that we can create that salty solution. So the first is a method called dry salting, which is where you take pieces of vegetable and you allow the naturally occurring moisture that's in the vegetable cells to leach out through osmosis. So you salt it and then it draws the water out, okay? When you do that, it creates its own brine solution. And this method works really well if you're using sort of wetter produce, things like cabbage or even citrus fruits. Obviously, you know, citrus is not a vegetable, but you can actually ferment it the same way. And that is going to create enough brine on its own. And you'll see this as you start to do this when we actually start making this in a few minutes. But so that works really well if you have produce that you're cutting up that's going to leach quite a bit of liquid. Things that are not going to leach any liquid or not enough anywhere, things like carrots, right? So carrots are going to be a lot drier and have less moisture content than something like cabbage. So even if you were to salt carrots and leave them, they're not going to, there's not enough moisture is going to come out of them. So what you would need to do for that instead is actually create a brine. And all that is creating salt water, essentially. And you're going to make the salt water, and then you're going to pour that over your vegetable mixture so that you have enough to fill up the container and cover them. So this is what you're going to do for drier produce, like carrots, or if you're doing cauliflower, the florets that I mentioned earlier, you would chop those up, put them in your jar, make a brine, and dump the brine over the cauliflower. The other thing you can do, which is one of my favorite things to ferment, are whole cloves of garlic. So I will pack a quart mason jar with whole cloves of garlic, make a brine solution, top it off, and then leave it. And it is absolutely delicious. If you think you like garlic, wait till you try it fermented, and the liquid that comes off of it is pure gold.
Someone wanted to know if you can ferment rice.
You can. In fact, fermented rice can then be turned into other products, right? So fermented rice is actually the basis of things like miso, or at least it can be. It can also be fermented into like a pudding. You can do like a fermented rice pudding. So definitely different process. That's not the same process as what we're doing, but it's still fermented. Okay, so let's talk about what kind of salts to use. So really, in a pinch, that's my bad salt pun, you can use any kind of salt that you have. I don't love iodized salt. I don't like iodized salt in general, so honestly, I never have it on hand. But the iodine in that salt can actually affect the texture of the vegetables, and it can lead to discoloration, and it leaves that sort of iodine-y metallic taste that sort of intensifies when it ferments. I don't really like eating that, so I don't like to make things with that. That being said, if that's all you have on hand, you can use it. I like kosher salt. I always have this on hand. I cook with it at home. It's relatively inexpensive for large quantities, so if you end up becoming addicted to fermenting like I am, you can use lots of it, and it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg. It's a nice sort of neutral flavor that doesn't affect the final outcome other than just tasting salty. There are other gourmet salts. You can use those. They're not going to, it's going to be a lot of expense for the amount that it changes the flavor. So I tend to save those as finishing salts. But again, if that's all you happen to have on hand at home, you can certainly use those as well.
Someone asks, when fermenting citrus fruit, do you ferment the entire fruit with the peel or leave the peel off?
So you could do either. I usually leave the peel on. So I will do, if you've heard of like Moroccan preserved lemons, those are fermented lemons. Those have been packed in salt, and then you rinse them, right, because they're really salty, and then you use the whole thing. The fermenting softens the rind enough that you can actually eat it. I do the same sort of thing, but with lime quarters. So I'll quarter up a lime and then stuff those in a jar with some salt and garlic and fresh cumin and ginger, and it's absolutely delicious. So yeah, you can definitely leave the peel on, and it softens enough that you can eat it easily. Okay, so we've talked about what kind of salt. Now let's talk about how much salt you should use. So my general rule of thumb is that at the beginning of fermentation, you want the product to taste a little bit saltier than you want the final end product to taste. So essentially what's going to happen is that the salt that you're tasting at the start is all sort of in the liquid that you're tasting, and it hasn't really had a chance yet to seep into the vegetables. So as it sits and as it ferments, that salt is going to balance out between the liquid and then inside of the vegetable itself, so that when you go to eat it at the end, it's going to taste more balanced. So obviously, if you have oversalted in the beginning and you try it and it tastes too salty, there's things you can do. I think I have a slide on this. Yes, I do. Salt, you can rinse your product off. You can start over, essentially, rinse it off, resalt it. You can also just add more water to the brine. So if you created a brine and it's too salty, you can dilute it. And then, of course, if you go to try it and it's not salty enough, then that's easy to fix. You just add more salt until you get it up to the way that you like it. Okay, so next, let's talk containers. So I really love glass mason jars, and I prefer the wide mouth ones so that I can get my hand all the way into the jar. You can use ceramic fermenting crocks. Those are a good option as well if you happen to have one of those. I actually prefer the mason jars because it's got a nice ratio between the opening of the jar and the amount that it can hold. We really want to keep everything submerged underneath the brine. Anything that's not submerged can float up, and that's when mold can start to happen, and we obviously don't want that. So I find in the pottery crocks that the opening is really big and there's more chances for food to float up and become unsubmerged and hanging out. So I love glass mason jars. What's also nice about these is that Carrie knows what I'm going to ask for, is that when it comes to submerging things, I'm jumping ahead here, but wide mouth mason jars, so either the either the pint ones, so the ones that are half this big, or the half-gallon ones, which are twice this big, or the quart jars, all of the ones with this wide mouth opening, it just so happens that a 4 or an 8 ounce regular jelly jar, so this is one of the little 4 ounce ones, fits just the right size inside of this wide mouth, so that when you go, and I'll show you this at the end, so you pack your vegetables in here, right, and then you need something to weigh those down so they don't float up out of the brine. So you can put this in here. I would use an empty one. This happens to have something that looks delicious in it.
Tomato paste.
Tomato paste, okay, that's delicious. In it, and that is gonna fit right in there. Keep everything down and leave just a little bit of room around the edge so that it doesn't get stuck and so that it's keeping everything down. So that's the reason that I love these the most. They're also typically, pandemic aside, easy to come by, and I also happen to have a lot of them at home. So
do you know what I learned? I'm fermenting some carrots at home, and a GT's kombucha bottle will also fit perfectly inside of a wide mouth jar. So that's holding down a ferment with another fermented bottle.
I like that.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's
very
almost
meta.
exactly
Yeah.
perfect. It's great.
I like that. I have never tried that,
But only the GTs. I think the Aquavitae is too wide.
okay. Yeah, because the GT
Tall,
is a little
skinny.
bit slender.
Yep.
Okay. And Hinge GT's bottle fits as well. Okay, good to know. I'm gonna have to try that now. You do want to avoid metallic or plastic containers. These can leach plastic, especially into your food. And then the metal, if it's aluminum or something, it can interact with the final product, and you don't want that. So stay with glass or ceramic for this. Airlock containers, if you know what I'm talking about and you happen to have those, you can use them. I think they're great in theory. They're definitely not necessary. Okay, how to keep your vegetables submerged. I just touched on this, but it's really important to do this because mold and yeast can't grow underwater. So they're only going to be able to, because they need oxygen. So they're only going to be able to grow up at the top where pieces are exposed. And that's why you want to make sure that everything stays below that brine line. So we just talked about these jars work really well. If you don't have one of these and you have a GT's kombucha bottle, that apparently also works really well. You can, if you don't have either of those, you can use a Ziploc bag. This is plastic, so it's not my favorite choice, but I have used it when I needed to. So a little Ziploc bag, fill it with just a little bit of water, just a couple tablespoons, and then you can stuff that into the opening of the jar, and then the water in the bag will sort of spread out and keep the weight will keep everything down. And then if you're using a larger crock, then something like a small dinner plate or dessert plate, inside of that crock, sometimes you need a weight on it, but something like that works well in vessels with larger openings. Okay, and then I said that time is one of the ingredients in fermenting things. So people ask, how long does it take? And this is one of those answers that drives certain people nuts, but it's done when it tastes good to you. So that might be 3 days, it might be 3 weeks, it might be 3 months. And there's no right answer and there's no wrong answer. It's whatever is going to taste good to you, because ultimately, unless you're giving it away, but you're going to be the one eating it, right? So vegetables do ferment faster in warmer temperatures, and they ferment slower and take longer in cooler temps. So it's still winter here, as much as we're probably all ready for it to be spring. It's still winter temperatures. Things are going to go slower now than they would in even, say, September or October. When it's really hot in summer, July and August, I honestly don't ferment a whole lot during those months because it's just so hot that things ferment so quickly, and I can't usually keep up with my garden and ferments going that fast. It is recommended that you taste your ferment frequently and make sure that your fingers are clean or you're using a clean fork and not double dipping. But I tell people, if you're new to fermenting, it's a good idea to just start tasting and taste frequently. And you're going to learn what a young ferment tastes like versus a more mature ferment. Okay. It's sort of, think about like wine. Wine is fermented. Young wine tastes different than an older vintage, right? The flavor profile and the complexity of the flavor changes as the wine ages. So in the beginning, with younger ferments, younger sauerkrauts, the flavors are going to be brighter and sharper, but they're going to have less complexity to them. As the product continues to ferment, the flavors dull in the sort of initial intensity on your tongue, but they have more complexity to them overall. So for some people, they like one and not the other, and vice versa. And then some people like me are happy to eat them at any stage. So really, you know, part of this is about experimenting and seeing what you like best and just playing around with it and having fun and learning, do you like young sauerkraut or do you like more mature sauerkraut, and finding the answer for you.
Couple questions coming in. The first one I'll actually answer. We will be switching to a full screen video when Krista begins the demo portion. I know her video is kind of small right now, so no worries. She'll be showing everything in a nice big video. And then someone asked, what about around the edges of the smaller jar that you put in the top? Won't the veggies float up to the edges? I've heard that grape leaves on top can help keep the vegetables down. And someone else said the same thing. I have trouble keeping my veg under brine. I've tried the Ziploc bag trick, but it didn't work because mold started to grow around the edges of the bag. Can I use stones?
You can. If you're having trouble with mold, what you can do is make sure first off that everything is really super clean with the jars. Sometimes if the jars are not super clean, then mold can grow. The other thing you can do is if for some reason your house is prone to that, take this smaller jar out every couple of days and just give it a wash and then put it back in. And then hopefully that is going to prevent the mold from growing. Same with the Ziploc bag. You can take that out every couple of days and just either switch the bag out or give the bag a good wash and then put it back in. I'm surprised that you're getting mold growing with that baggie in there. Maybe there's pieces that are up on the edge, but usually I haven't had trouble with this jar and jar combo. There's really not a whole lot of area on the edge. So unless you have really tiny pieces of something, so like sometimes ginger or garlic, if I've minced those up really fine, those can sort of fit in here. But for the most part, when I'm doing just like mixed veggies, none of those pieces are small enough that I've had trouble with it. You could use grape leaves. The other thing you can use is actually the cabbage leaves. So these outer leaves that we tend to just peel off anyway, what you can do is take one of those and either rip it like I am or sort of cut it. And this will be easier to actually show you when I have stuff in here, but you can kind of put that in, kind of what you would do with a grape leaf, and then put this on top. I will be honest, I actually find that this molds more than not having it because half of this cabbage leaf is hanging out. So this isn't my favorite method of doing it, but you can try that again. If this is something that you can experiment with, there's a reason that people do it. Other people have better luck than I do with that. So maybe you'll be one of those people too, but try washing your jar more and see if that helps make a difference.
I know too, I started a friend fermenting and she thought that the salt that starts to crust around when it evaporates was mold, and I was like, no, it's salt. So sometimes that might be another thing that people think is going bad. Someone commented too, not sure if you're planning to mention this, but you want to use filtered water. The chlorine in water can affect the taste of your ferment. My friend said, this cucumber tastes like a swimming pool.
Ew, yes, that is a good point. And you know what, I forget to say that because my water is always filtered. I have a filter at my house, and so that is a very good point. Filtered water is better. Okay. Where are we? How to store a finished ferment. Okay. So once you've tasted your ferment and you decide that for you it's done and it's to your liking, what you're going to want to do, and this is another reason number 759, why I love mason jars, is because they have lids and the lids fit really well, right, to be airtight. So when the ferment is done, put a lid on it or put it into a container that has a lid and then put it into your fridge, or if you have a root cellar, you can pop it down there. But you're going to put it in your fridge, and then it basically stays good forever. As long as you're properly storing it, fermented foods remain safe to eat indefinitely. One trick to maximize the shelf life of your ferment is if you start eating it and you get about halfway down into a jar, then transfer that into a smaller container and make sure that when you do, there's brine covering everything when you transfer over. What that's going to do is it's going to reduce the amount of headspace in the jar and the amount of oxygen that everything's exposed to, and that just helps things last longer. When things are in the fridge, you don't have to worry about everything staying submerged under the brine, because at that point the cold temp of the fridge is going to be what's helping to minimize the amount of mold that might grow. So that is not as much of a worry in there, but you do still want brine in the jar. Okay, so how do you know that your ferment is doing healthy and well? Initially, it's going to show signs of bubbling, and that's the lactic acid byproduct. It's creating bubbles in the jar. There's going to be a slight dulling of color in your product. So if you have, green cabbage, is going to go from green to sort of a dull, a little bit more of a brown color. And then acidic but pleasant odor. I say pleasant, that's a relative term. Not everyone loves the smell of this, so don't listen to your mother-in-law who thinks all fermented products are disgusting, and you have to judge that for yourself. But we all know when food smells wrong, when it smells when it's molded and gross. You don't want that kind of smell. And then you also don't want visible signs of mold or bacteria growth on the surface. There is one exception, calm yeast, which I'll talk about in a moment. If you see stuff funky growing on the top, when in doubt, just toss it out, right? So cabbage is cheap. Nobody's fermenting because they have to in order to have food to get through the winter. So if something goes wrong in the process and you've got funky colors growing on there, then just toss it out. It's better to be safe than sorry. But okay, and so unhealthy ferments, we just said this, but mold, bacterial growth on the surface, we've all seen gross food that's gone bad. So we all know what that looks like. And then sometimes too, you can get slimy vegetable pieces from calm yeast, and you are going to want to toss that. It's just not fun to eat. So the wrath of calm. Calm yeast is annoying, but otherwise it's a harmless yeast product, and it can form on the top of vegetable ferments. I never really see it in the winter. It's really something that's more common in the warmer months, which is another reason that I don't do a lot of fermenting in July and August. And it's not a food safety issue, but it is a food quality issue. So if you leave it unchecked, it can ruin the texture of your ferment. Again, it can make things slimy, and it's not fun to eat slimy sauerkraut. This is what it looks like, with the caveat that there's nothing in that jar that's going to change the color of it. So by that, I mean, if that sauerkraut were made with red cabbage, or if it had some grated beet in it, or something else like turmeric, that's going to make it really bright orange, right? So if it's pink or red or orange to start off with, then that calm yeast, which is normally white, is going to be stained by that, and then that is going to look like that, but be pink or orange or red or whatever. But you can see it's sort of this spider webby stuff on top. And then the bubbles there that you can see what's pushing up, that's just the trapped gases that have been off-gassed that are trapped under that yeast film. So if it's gotten that bad, I usually just toss it. You can skim that off the top and then pop it in the fridge, but usually if you've gotten this far, the quality just isn't great. So I usually just move on.
A couple more questions coming in for you. Someone definitely wants to know your fermented lime combination and fermented garlic combination recipe, please. So I think we'll probably talk about this with your inspiration slide.
Sure.
What about bottled water, spring water or distilled water? Is there really any difference at that point if you're using bottled water?
Yeah, so definitely don't need to use distilled water. Again, if it's the kind of thing where that's all that you have access to, you can ferment with distilled water. It does not need to be distilled to ferment. It can definitely just be tap water or filtered tap water. The garlic recipe is really simple. It's garlic and brine, and that's it. So I cheat. I buy pre-peeled garlic at Costco because I love to eat garlic and I hate to peel garlic. So I buy the big bags of pre-peeled stuff. I fill the jar up with cloves. I top it off with salty water, and that's it. I put my little stopper in it, and then I leave it. Honestly, mine usually never makes it to the fridge because I just eat out of the jar as it continues to ferment because it's so good. I can't usually wait. The limes, so it's limes that I quarter and then I salt. And then honestly, those are great by themselves, but then I also add in other flavorings. And I'll be honest, I don't really have a recipe because it changes each time that I make it, but ginger, garlic, cumin, and coriander with the lime is sort of my go-to. And any combination of that that tastes and smells good to you as you're making is going to be absolutely fantastic when it comes out. Here is some other fermenting inspiration for you. So all the way on the left are garlic scapes. So when it becomes that season again, which hopefully is, well, not hopefully, it is sooner than we think, that is delicious. And then I puree those up, put it into pesto. It's absolutely divine, or hummus, or salad dressings, or marinades. In the middle there is a hot sauce. So I've got peppers on the bottom, and then there's actually a big fat clove of garlic in the middle, and then onions on top. All the way, so I let that ferment, and then I pureed it, obviously to turn it into a hot sauce. And then all the way on the right is apple and I think rosemary.
Yeah.
I think I remembered that last time. That one is actually finished. You can see that I have eaten off of that one because the jar is not quite full and the brine is not all the way at the top. So I topped that off before I put that in the fridge. But here are some other ideas you can do. You could do grated carrots with ginger. That's delicious to toss onto salad. This is what it was. It was apples, rosemary, and garlic. One of my favorites is radicchio with lemon zest, fresh oregano, and sliced fennel. That is absolutely delicious. There's the lime quarters. In the summer when there's fresh corn, I'll do corn with cilantro and peppers and onions and make like a fresh fermented corn salsa. Cauliflower florets I've mentioned. And you can, this is what's fun about it. You can do it with curry powder, you can do it with garam masala, you could do it with sumac powder, you could do it with nothing, just salt and pepper. You can play around, right? So whatever you've got or whatever you like eating, you can experiment and see what you like best. Mustard seeds, this is actually fun if you've never tried making your own mustard. It's really easy to do. Buy some mustard seeds in bulk at the co-op, and then I put in some honey and turmeric and let that bubble. I roasted peppers and onions, garlic, sauerkraut with toasted sesame seeds and dried nori is delicious. You can do butternut squash cubes with fresh rosemary in brine and let that ferment for a couple of days, and then take that out and puree it, and it is insanely delicious. It is so good. So the idea here is that these possibilities are endless, right? You can really, once you understand the basic process of how to do it, you can just experiment and have fun and play around with different things.
Great. Someone asked, where do you leave your ferments? In the refrigerator? What about the summertime, temp and light?
Yes, so we were going to talk about that, but basically you want to leave it in a cool, dark place, a room temp. So you don't want to put it in the fridge yet, because remember the fridge is where you're going to put it when you go to store it, to sort of preserve it at the level of fermentation that you like. It's too cold in the fridge for the fermentation action to really happen. So just room temp. You want to out of direct sunlight, so don't put it in a windowsill. And then you just want to put it someplace that you don't forget about it. So don't put it in the back of a cupboard, but I have like a corner of my kitchen countertop that's sort of the less trafficked area of my kitchen. So I toss it over there until it's ready to put in the fridge.
For the hot sauce, do you puree in the brine along with the onions, peppers, and garlic?
Yes, I do. I keep all that brine. Yep.
Cool. And then someone else, Maggie asks, can you talk about the different ways that you eat fermented veggies other than sauerkraut for inspiration, so we can think about how to cut them? Do you eat it alone, with sandwiches, etc.? And by that, I mean a veggie mix, cabbage, carrot, etc. mixed together.
Yeah, so good question. You can just eat it on the side as like a condiment, essentially. Depending on what it is, so say you're making fermented garlic scapes, that I would puree, and again I would put that into things as an ingredient. So you might stir it into hummus, you might stir it into like a roasted eggplant dip, you might use it as something that you put in a sandwich, right? You can make like an oil with it, make like an aioli that's delicious. So it depends on what you're making. Grated carrots I like to have on hand. Anytime I'm eating a salad, I'll toss those on instead of doing just raw fresh carrot. I'll do grated fermented carrot. So there's all kinds of different ways that you can eat it. It depends on what it is, and again, this is one of those places that you can get creative and experiment with those.
And someone else wants to know if you can do a puree before fermenting. Can you puree the veggies and herbs and ferment the puree, I guess?
You could. The issue would be that you're not going to be able to submerge it, right? Because once it's pureed, then the stuff at the top is the same. So I would wait. I would wait to puree until the end. So that's what I do when I make hot sauce or when I make mustard, is I ferment first and then I puree afterwards.
Can you ferment tomatoes?
You can ferment tomatoes. They are quite delicious. You can also ferment green tomatoes. So remember that for the fall, when you get stuck with a bunch of green tomatoes, like I inevitably always do, is you can quarter or chop them however you want, but I usually quarter them and ferment green tomatoes, and they're really very yummy.
Fermented cherry tomatoes are my favorite. They're like little bubbles that you get to pop, and they're so good.
Cherry tomatoes never last long enough in my house to actually make it into anything usually. They're just like, they usually don't even make it into the kitchen. My son picks them up and feeds them to me, and then they're gone. But that sounds really good. Yeah. Okay. And then last thing, just to wrap up, is to learn more. There's a couple of books by Sandra Katz, who's sort of the father of the modern fermentation revival of interest. He's excellent. There's Ferment Your Vegetables by Amanda Pfeiffer. Anyone that's on Facebook, there's actually a really wonderful Facebook group called Wild Fermentation, which is excellent to ask questions in and get inspiration or to troubleshoot. It's a really great group of people who love talking about fermentation. And then in the fall, you can volunteer with Flack Family Farm. The co-op here sells their kimchi and sauerkraut products, which are delicious. The times that I run out of my own, I buy the Flack Family Farm stuff. But you can actually go up to the farm and help them on their production days, which is a lot of fun. Okay, and that's it. That's the end of the slideshow.
Excellent. I'm going to send your video to the large full screen. Everybody will see. A couple more questions that came in towards the end that we'll ask, and then we'll get started with the demo. How much of a fermented food should you eat every day to get the gut health benefit? Do you have any ideas around the health part?
I would say if you're eating any every day, then that's going to go a long way. And then also eating, it's like anything, right? So eating a variety of fermented foods, so not just one type of thing, it's going to give you the maximum health benefit. And then the other thing, which is kind of fun, is that if you eat your sauerkraut as it ages, which is something that I'll do often, is I will make a batch and then I'll sort of leave it on the counter, and it sort of never even makes its way to the fridge. After a few days, when it starts to become a little bit fermented, I'll start eating out of it for dinner, let's say. And then over the course of the next couple of weeks, as the sauerkraut continues to ferment, I keep taking some out of it and then leaving what's left to ferment longer. And what you do when you do that is that you're actually eating the ferment at all of these different stages of bacterial growth in the jar, because there's different bacteria that ferment in the beginning initially, and then different bacteria that take over after those first bacteria die off, and then even other bacteria that last longer and sort of finish the fermentation process, if you will. And so if you eat out of the jar as you go, then you actually get a whole range of different microorganisms that you're eating just from one product. So,
great. Can you use frozen veggies, specifically looking at the squash example?
I don't know, I've never tried it. So you'll have to experiment. And
the texture might be, it'll get squishier, I would imagine. You've already damaged the cell walls.
If it's squash and you're going to puree it anyway,
right? But like,
then I don't think that should matter. It would, honestly, it would probably work. I can't think of why it wouldn't work. Try it.
Yeah, I would say do a jar of frozen and a jar of fresh.
Yeah. I mean, you can even just do like not a half pint, excuse me, I keep saying that, a pint jar, you know, just do a couple of cups and see what happens. That could be a good experiment.
My tomato salsa gets fizzy. Is that normal?
Yeah, so the fizz, well, your fermented tomato salsa, just to clarify.
I'm imagining they meant.
Yeah, that's what you're talking about. Yeah, the fizz is the bubbles and the gas that's being formed by those microorganisms, by the lactic acid. Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about beets? It sounds like you shouldn't lacto ferment them, but then they were listed on the ingredient list in small quantities.
Yeah, so it's not that you can't ferment them, it's that you can't ferment them in large quantities and get the product that you're probably expecting. So the issue is that beets have a really high sugar content, and what happens when you ferment things with a lot of sugar is that the lactic acid bacteria, that's not what they want. And so what ends up happening is you get something that's closer to alcohol instead of a vinegary sort of product. So if you use all beets, it's gonna just turn into booze essentially, which if that's what you want, then that's great. Go ahead and ferment beets. But if you're looking for something that's got more of that briny, vinegary, sauerkraut taste, you can use some beet, which is why it's on the list. I have one here. You just don't want to do all beet.
Can you reuse brine for a new batch of ferment with different veggies?
No, but that's a good question. So the reason that you don't want to do that is actually what I was talking about earlier, how the microbial profile of the ferment changes over time. And so if you're reusing your brine, that's going to have microbes that don't like the environment of a fresh product the same way that they were happy in the product from before. So go ahead and just start over with new brine.
And the last one for right now is, how long can you leave something to ferment? Is there a too long?
Forever.
Forever.
Yeah.
Sweet.
I mean, there's some misos that are fermented for 5 years before they're even eaten at all. Sauerkraut, here's the thing, sauerkraut is gonna ferment and it's gonna keep fermenting, but after a certain point, and I can't say exactly how long that is because it depends on the temperature, but at a certain point, it's not really gonna change a whole lot more. So 6 months to 12 months is not gonna be a drastically different product, but essentially you can leave things out forever. As long as they're properly stored and they're submerged under the brine a long time.
And then I think this question, someone says, from the list of different ideas, I guess that inspiration list, do we add brine? And some of those would need a brine added, and some of them would be you're going to create that wet brine from the cabbage. I think that's what this question is asking. From the brine, from the list, we would add a brine. I think it's just some of them would need a mixed brine, and some would make their own, correct?
Yep, so it depends on what you're making there. So obviously, let's talk about the garlic scape example again. So that was the picture all the way on the left. So garlic scapes, even if you were to salt them and leave them, they don't have enough moisture. They're too dry, right? So those I made a brine. Grated carrots, however, are going to need less brine. So you're going to have to add a little bit of liquid to top those off. And then other things like the example of limes or lemons quartered up and salted. Obviously, the citrus fruits have lots of moisture in them, and so the salt in there is enough to draw that moisture out that after a couple of hours, it's going to cover itself in brine. So from that list of examples, some of those needed a brine and some of those are just dry salt, and it'll create its own brine.
All right, and there's one last question that came in that I'll ask, and then maybe we'll get started on the demo part. Would you ferment an Indian-style hot chili pickle as a dry or a wet fermentation? Like a brine or salted chilies, I guess the question.
Salted chilies?
Indian-style hot chili pickle as a dry or wet fermentation. Maybe if someone wants to, whoever that was wants to clarify in the chat, I can ask the clarification, but.
Yeah, so I'm assuming you're starting with fresh peppers. You would probably need to add a little bit of brine, I think, and yeah.
Great.
And it doesn't really matter. Here's the thing. If you're having to add some brine or you have enough brine from the vegetable itself, it doesn't matter. The end product is going to be the same. It's not going to affect how it tastes in the end. So if you have to, and sometimes this is something I'll notice actually, I've fermented enough and for long enough that I can kind of tell how old the cabbage is based on how wet it is when I go to make sauerkraut. So for instance, this time of year, March, this cabbage didn't grow recently. Maybe it did. Maybe it came from, you know, someplace way south of here. But if it's a local cabbage, this thing hasn't actually been a plant in the ground in a while. So this is going to have a lot less moisture than a fresh cabbage in September. So in September, when I use a local cabbage, it's nice and juicy. You put salt on it and you start mashing it up, as you'll see that we're going to do, and it's wicked wet, wicked fast. In March, sometimes it takes a little bit longer, and sometimes I have to add brine to it just because the cabbage has lost a little bit of moisture in the process of sitting around for months waiting for me to eat it, right? It still turns into sauerkraut at the end of the day. It's still delicious. It's just that sometimes, depending on the product, you have to add a little bit or not, but it doesn't affect the final outcome.
Oh my gosh, lots of questions coming in. Well, I'll ask two more and then we'll get started on the demo part. It's awesome that people have so many questions. I love it.
Yes.
And the person clarified small, fresh green chili peppers. So yeah, you probably want to brine them like you would with your hot sauce sort of idea.
Yeah, exactly. I brine those.
If some of the brine overflows the next day and there's air bubbles created within our sauerkraut, do we need to replace it?
No, as long as everything is still submerged. And actually, I was going to talk about this then, but we can just do it now. So after you fill your jar up, after you put your weight in there, what I like to do is then put this whole setup into or onto some kind of catch tray. So whether that's a little dessert plate, I have some old Tupperware containers that I keep around for this, little plastic dishes, and so I'll set this in there because it is going to overflow a little bit, or it can. It's very likely to overflow a little bit. And this just keeps the mess off of your counter. And you want to swap, once that gets some liquid in it, you want to wash that so it doesn't get gross. But if that bubbles over a little bit, as long as whatever is left in here is still covered up with brine, you're fine. If you need to, you can top it off with a little bit of water. So you do have to keep an eye on it, especially like this time of year when the air is really dry, things evaporate a little bit quicker. And if you find that stuff is not quite covered or it bubbled over too much, just add a couple tablespoons of water. You don't even need to worry about brine. The solution, it's still salty enough in here that just a little bit of extra water will keep everybody happy.
Great. Someone says, do you have to do the canning process if you're going to store your food?
No, in fact, canning is a form of food preservation that's totally separate from fermenting. So you can can sauerkraut. If you do that though, I think one, it's redundant because it's already, fermenting is a form of food preservation. So canning it is then just taking an extra step that I think is unnecessary. But then two, you're also killing all the microorganisms in that jar, which also defeats the purpose of eating fermented foods. So you do not need to can this stuff. That's a whole other form of food preservation that you use and is great in other contexts. But for fermented foods, you don't need to can anything.
Awesome. Let's go ahead and get started on the demo portion. I'll get the keyboard and the mouse out of your way so that we don't get cabbage and salt.
Yes, like I did last time.
But yeah, go ahead and get started, and people can keep submitting questions as they have them, and I'll keep asking them to Krista for you all. You get to watch and see how it's done. This is the fun part.
Yeah.
And if anybody, I would love to know also, this is sort of my chance to take a minute. I'd love to know where people are watching from. If you want to put into the question and answer box, we've learned that our events are reaching a much wider audience than just the Vermont area through Eventbrite and stuff like that. So I'd love to know where you're all watching from. We're here in nice chilly Vermont, although we're about to get some 50-degree weather days, which is nice. And I'd also like to know if anybody is fermenting along with us. So I sent out the ingredient handout in advance if people wanted to ferment along. So I'd love to know what you're making. You are making something. All right.
Can everybody see? I can't see me. So
yeah, it's the whole, you have the whole width of the table on camera.
So I am just starting off, I'm just going to quarter my cabbage here and take the core out. You know what? Let's do this.
We've got people from all over again.
Oh, cool.
We've got Ludlow, Vermont. We've got Burlington, Hawaii, New York, North Carolina, Canada, Jericho, the UK.
I'm a UK person.
Yeah. Forget it. They're
late
ahead of us. Yeah.
I was going to say, this is going to be getting
Ohio, Virginia, more Canada. Awesome. Love it. It's so cool. Silver linings of a global pandemic.
Right.
And reach people in other places.
Here, I'm going to switch this smaller.
Yeah, I wasn't sure which size knife you liked.
No, this is perfect. I can both.
Tucson, Arizona, South Burlington. Okay. Someone in Canada is fermenting with us and is going to try a jar of shredded carrots. Any special things they need to know with carrots? No?
Nope, just add whatever. You can just do carrots, or you can flavor it however you want. So again, it's going to be what do you want to eat, right? So ginger's yummy, but it's also fun to do. Sometimes I do what I call pizza carrots. So I'll do oregano, and a little bit of basil, and a little bit of garlic, and then some red chili flake. And it sort of tastes pizza-ish.
Carrot fennel seed, really good.
Fennel seed, that's a good one.
And for everybody asking, yes, we are recording this, and we will post it on the website of the co-op a little bit later. I'll send an email out to everyone when the recording is up. It takes us a while to get them up, but yes, we are recording. So you can watch this back when you have questions.
So what I'm doing is I'm just chopping up cabbage, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start salting as I go. So I like to salt layers of food as it goes into the bowl. And I'm just going to, I just did like a healthy pinch. Again, you're going to taste as you go. I've been doing this for a really long time, so I have a sense of how salty I like it. But I just give that a toss, and then I'm just going to let this sit with that salt on there while I continue chopping. And what that's going to do is this salt is going to get a jump start on pulling some of that moisture out. I can already tell this cabbage is a lot drier than fall cabbage. This is an older cabbage. I can just tell by the feel of it. So this might need some brine.
Someone from Arizona just commented they still have cabbage in their garden.
They have cabbage in their garden?
Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, must be nice.
Yeah, they've got winter growing season.
Can I do this process in a metal bowl?
Yeah, I just don't like to leave it fermenting in metal. But yeah, I use metal bowls at home all the time. This just happens to be glass.
Great. And I think the person asked about adding extra brine to their cabbage. Do you have to push the cabbage down again or just top it off the way it is with brine? Like if it overflows.
Bubbled over?
Yeah, if it overflows.
I guess it depends on the situation, but at the end of the day, you have to make sure everything is submerged. So if you need to push it down to have that happen, then do that. But if topping it off just gets everybody to kind of float down and stay in place, then you don't have to worry about it.
It's great that we have so many people from all over. I love it.
Yeah, that's quite a span from Hawaii to the UK.
Yeah. All those different time zones too. I'm so confused by time zones. I'm always
It's like evening in the UK. It must be like morning in Hawaii.
Yeah. Someone's fermenting with garlic, carrots, and onions.
Yummy.
Good. Someone asked, metal lids are okay or plastic?
To store it in?
To store, I believe.
It doesn't matter, because it's not really going to touch the food. Your jar is not going to be so full that the lid is touching it. It doesn't matter. Whatever you have on hand.
And someone just asked to make sure they can see the weighting down and brining process on the full screen now. It's just we were showing, like, you know, with the little jar.
Oh, yeah.
Little screen, but
when I get to that point, I'll show you. So I'm just going to do more salt. I've got a couple pinches here. And I'm going to leave that. I think somebody said onion, and that sounds pretty good right now. So.
Someone says, I live in a hot, dry climate. Any special considerations? I also have cabbage growing in my garden with kale and pak choi. We're jealous. We're waiting for the first time.
Basically, we're just jealous. No, I mean, if it's really hot, things are just going to move quicker. So you're just going to want to taste them faster. So for us in Vermont, like a week can go by and it's going to be fine to leave it in between. For you, if it's really hot, give it 3 days and then make sure that you're checking it. And then if it's really dry, the only other consideration is that you may just have to watch out for evaporation and just keep an eye on the brine at the top there. But you can always just top it off if you need to. Otherwise, you should be good to go.
Have someone fermenting along from Baltimore. Tried fermenting one time before, and I'm watching to reinforce my learning. Great, welcome.
Nice.
I'm definitely a visual learner. I get that. I like watching other people do stuff to learn. From my hometown area, Delaware originally. East Coast.
Nice.
So you're doing some yellow onion, it looks like.
Yeah, I got a half an onion in here.
Have you ever had a ferment that turned out kind of gross that you didn't like? You thought a flavor combination was going to be awesome, and then you're like, whoa, not doing that again.
Yes, I was very excited about doing dandelion greens, hoping that those, and I did just a little bit. It was part of a sauerkraut. It wasn't just dandelion greens. It's absolutely disgusting. Totally, just disgusting.
They're super bitter. Yeah.
Yeah, and I knew that, and I kind of wanted that bitter offset. No, just disgusting.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Can you talk a bit more about how to make those fermented Moroccan lemons? And then also someone says, I tried fermenting cabbage. It was out for a week and then the fridge. I tasted it. It was so salty that I trashed it. I like the vinegar taste like kimchi. How do you get that taste instead of so salty?
So it sounds like it started off too salty. So I would, when you try again, make sure that when you start, it's not too salty. So again, you want it just a little bit saltier than you want the final product, but not anything that was that salty when you tried it after a week was too salty when you started. To get that kind of briny kimchi flavor, it's just about letting it ferment long enough. I will answer the other question. I just want to point out that just this little bit of salt sitting for a minute, I don't know how well this picks up on camera, but you can see that the cabbage looks a little bit more wet. You can see my hands are wet now. And that's just from the salt drying out the moisture. The onion helped too, but this was mostly from the cabbage being in there, right? And so then, I'm just gonna take this onion skin out. So then what you wanna do, once you get everything chopped up, is you wanna just start smashing this up a little bit. So obviously if you're doing something where you're just going to need to add a brine, so you're doing carrot coins, let's say, you don't need to do this part. But if you're dry salting to create its own brine, then doing this is going to make this process go a little bit faster of breaking down the cell walls and drying out some of this moisture. So again, you can see just me massaging this for a couple of, not even a minute here, it's a lot, my hands are a lot wetter, so the difference. And so you're just going to keep doing that for a while, and I'll show you when it's time to start stuffing it in your jar. But I'll go back. What was the other question?
The fermented, the preserved lemons. Can you talk a little bit more about how to do those? Yeah,
so it's like stupid simple. You just quarter up lemons, and then you salt them really heavily. So this is actually one of those cases where traditionally they are way too salty. So this is where my general rule of thumb does not apply. You want them to be really salty to start because you are going to rinse them off after a while. Not after a while, before you eat them, when you go to use them. So you literally quarter lemons and then salt them profusely and stuff them in a jar. And then you just wait. And then usually overnight, they will that salt will draw out enough moisture that they should be covered. If for some reason they're not, you can top it off with a little bit of water, but usually that's enough to get them going.
I saw a recipe the other day for making lemon bars with preserved lemons, and I'm so tempted. Like that sweet, sickly sweet lemon bar tempered by like the funk of a preserved lemon instead.
I like that.
And the salt, I'm so tempted.
I'm gonna have to try that.
Yeah.
My husband keeps wanting to make lemon bars, and I'm always like, that's too sweet.
They're
but
so sweet.
I bet with, can't get up here. Preserved lemons, that would be delicious.
Someone wants to know, have you ever used pickling spices with a lacto ferment? Like the pre-mixed blend of pickling spice, I guess it's like clove and allspice.
I haven't, but I've ended up essentially doing that, just making my own blends all the time. I love using spices. I use spices a lot when I ferment things. So I haven't specifically done pickling spice only because I don't ever have it on hand, because I always have whole spices instead of blends a lot of time, but that would be delicious.
Someone wants to know, do you always bruise the veggies? And I think, like you mentioned, it's really for the kind where you're trying to make its own brine rather than the kind you're going to pour brine over. Exactly.
So like when I'm doing garlic cloves, I don't bruise those. I'm not mashing those up. They just go right in the jar. They get topped with brine. You can make it. And literally, it takes 2 minutes to make that. I'm just doing this because I want this moisture. See how wet and lovely this is getting? And I'm going to keep this one super simple. I'm just doing cabbage and onion. It smells so good.
It does smell really good already in the kitchen.
The other thing you can do are fresh herbs. So you can add things like cilantro or parsley or sage or rosemary or thyme. All of those, especially if you've got, bits and pieces in your fridge that need to get used up, this is a delicious way to do that. You can add in fresh seasonings and herbs that way also. It doesn't just have to be dried spices.
For anybody who shops at the co-op, we have Pitchfork Farm and Pickles Zinger Kraut, which is Meyer lemon, black pepper, and rosemary. It is so good. And you should definitely get it while it's here because it's one of those like not around all the time ones.
Like a seasonal flavor?
Yeah, but I'm at like it's piney and it's lemony, and then you get these like crunchy black pepper bits because they just crack the pepper. It's so good. It's one of my favorites. I will eat an entire jar in one sitting if I'm not careful. Someone wants to know how long before the lemons are ready? How long would you let those sit?
Those I usually let sit about a month or so, at a minimum. And then usually they sit longer, but those about a month, and that's less about the flavor continuing to develop and more about the rind softening enough to really be edible raw.
Someone asks, what about caraway seeds? You add caraway.
Absolutely, love caraway seeds. In fact, that's one of my favorites to do with cabbage. And that's kind of a very traditional sauerkraut seasoning. Very good. In fact, that would be really good just with this onion.
So we might have caraway in the closet. Want me to look?
Sure.
Someone asked, I had to step away for a minute. How much onion did she add to what appears to be about half or slightly more than half of that large cabbage?
It was half of a medium-sized onion.
Don't mind me just looking in the face.
So I'm not quite there yet, but I'm getting close, which is that I've got some liquid pooling up at the bottom of my bowl. I don't know if you can see that, but it's starting to get, and then when I squeeze, here, let me turn my hand. You can see it's starting, oh, there we go. See how it's dripping? Can you see that? So that's what we want. This can actually go a little bit longer. And then I'll actually wait, because if we have caraway seeds, I'm going to add those in. But the idea is that you want to pick a piece up if you're doing the dry brine. And when you squeeze it, you want it to drip moisture, like squeezing a kitchen sponge. So this could go a little bit further. And that's just sort of the rule of thumb so that you know that it has enough liquid in it that it's going to get covered when you put it in there.
Well, either cumin or caraway, because they look very similar and I can't smell them through a mask.
It'll be good either way.
There we go.
And actually, do you have a towel?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, my hands. See how wet my hands are? That's what we want, right? And actually, I'm going to push these glasses that won't stay up off my face.
How long would you leave out the garlic cloves to ferment? How long do you do your fermenty garlic bit?
That's one that can also go a little bit longer, a couple of weeks to a month. Will look like cumin. What these might be, let's see.
Right, they're so similar and I can't smell them through the mask. I figure you can be able to smell them under the face shield better than I can.
It still smells like cumin, but in it goes. It can be delicious either way.
Someone commented, this process seems very relaxing. Yes, it is.
It is for all of you who are not the type A personalities that are wondering exactly how much of everything to use, right? I think that's cumin. Yeah, it's still gonna be delicious. One of my favorites. So garlic, you can leave it for a while. I usually leave it for a couple of weeks at a minimum. It's hard to resist that one. Usually too, I'll be honest, usually my favorite part of fermenting is the actual fermented vegetable itself. But with the garlic, it's actually the brine that is the most delicious. I could drink that brine. It's like a sour, briny, salty, vinegary deliciousness, but then with garlic, it's like next level delicious. It's so good.
Someone asked, did you include the core of the cabbage?
I didn't, just because it's not delicious to eat. So I took the core out. I just wedged it out. If you normally eat it anyway, you absolutely could ferment it. I just don't eat it because I don't like eating it. It's too
woody.
It's too woody, yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna start.
Yeah, I love watching Krista do these classes, and I like fermenting, and it is very relaxing, especially if you're angry about something. I kind of find that I'm less angry after I've pummeled a head of cabbage to submission.
You know, this is fun too. If you've got kids, you can get them in on this. It can be fun for them to help do this part, right? Well, all of it really, depending on how old they are, they can help even do the cutting. So you can see I'm putting the cabbage in here, and this jar looks full, but it's not full. So you really want to pack it down, because right now, if you were to just leave this, for one thing, there's not brine that's covering this. For another thing, there's a lot of air in here, in all the spaces between. So this is, again, one of the reasons I love these jars is I can fit my hand in it, and you want to be careful with glass, right? You don't crank on it too hard. But I like to go around the jar and push down and really start to work that air out. And what it's also going to do is it's going to force that liquid all to come together. And eventually it'll start to work its way up. It's not ready yet to cover the cabbage. I've got more liquid in the bowl here. But you can see what looked like, a full jar by normal standards is now actually really a little bit more than half a jar. As you can see, there's a lot less space in here. You can't see it on the camera, I bet, but this is mostly liquid in there now because I've taken out that airspace.
What could you use if you can't fit your hands in the jar?
You can use anything else that will fit in there. So if you have a wooden spatula that you can, like the end of a spatula, so turn it over and use that. If you've got some other kind of kitchen implement, really anything that's gonna fit in there will work.
Someone asked, what do you use the garlic brine for or in, or do you just drink it like you said?
Well, I usually just drink it, but it's divine in marinades, homemade salad dressings. It's another one again in any kind of like dip, so hummus, or like a white bean dip with garlic, fermented garlic and then rosemary. So good. Again, just drink it. It's so good.
It's like people who drink pickle juice, right? That's
yeah, which I think that's disgusting. I love pickles, but pickle juice is too much for me. But garlic juice. Okay, so the other thing is I eyeballed that cabbage, right? I told you I've been doing this a while. I kind of eyeballed just about right on what was going to fit in this jar. But if you didn't quite eyeball right, that's fine. So if you need to, you can use a second jar, or if like me, you've got a little bit of cabbage that's left over, then go ahead and use that. Keep cutting that if you haven't filled your jar, because you want your jar to be full. And when I say full, I don't mean all the way to the top, but with canning jars, you want to go up to the shoulder level, so right under the, what's called the rim is about where you want it. I've got just a little bit of room left here. You're going to squeeze this in. You don't want it too full because then once you start to pack it down and weigh it down with some kind of jar, it's really going to just send the brine over the top. But you can see, and I'll do this over the bowl so you can see, but I'm going to pour it back in. But see how much brine is in there? And so that was enough that it was covering this. I'm going to pour it back in here. I just wanted to dump it out so you could see. So I'm just going to pour all that beautiful cabbage juice right back on top. Okay, so this one is good. And again, I don't know how well you can see this. When I tip it, it kind of loses it. But these cabbage pieces, the way that I cut it, for the most part, they're not floating up enough that once this goes in, and I'm not going to actually use that one because it's got stuff in it. But once this goes in, there's not going to be room around the edges for that stuff to come up and float up. So that's going to be good.
There should be an empty one in the closet behind you down to the left if you wanted to show that with an empty one. So like hip height, left side. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is actually good because it shows you that either the 4 ounce or the half pint 8 ounce jar have the same bottom to fit. So you can see this guy fits in here, has just a little bit of room around the edges here. And what you do want to do, so I use these cumin seeds, right? So they are floating up a little bit. So I've got one here that's sort of on the rim of the jar on the inside, and I'm just going to take that and get rid of that guy because he's going to keep floating up and getting in my way. Oops, I just lost an onion, but that's okay. But otherwise, there's no pieces of cabbage or onion that are coming up. There's not enough room for them. They're packed in there.
There we go.
They're packed in there tight. And then what I would want to do too is I would wash this down. So like at home, I wipe the outside of this jar with a clean wet rag, just because all these pieces that are stuck to it, because my hands are a little bit dirty still, those could all just get funky, and you don't want that on the outside of the jar either. So what I'm going to do is I would then take this, and again, I would put it on, put it in a bowl, put it on a little plate. Some places it's going to catch that overflow because this, as it bubbles, might spill over a little bit. And then I'm going to take just a clean dish towel. I've been wiping my hands on this one, but imagine it's clean at home. And I'm just going to drape it over the ferment, and then I'm going to tuck it off in the corner. And all this is doing is just keeping dust out in the summer or in the fall when fruit flies are a problem, I would actually tie, this towel isn't big enough, so I would actually tie this on here, put a rubber band on it, something to keep the fruit flies out. This time of year when I'm not worried about those, just something draped over it is enough. And then again, just set that off to the side, wait, keep tasting it, right? So you're gonna wanna taste it as you go. And I don't know if you saw it, but I did taste this before for the salt level. It's perfect, it's delicious. But if you needed to, I should have said this before I packed it in there, but if you needed to, it's definitely cumin.
Yeah. That's really good.
Yeah, you could adjust the salt level. So again, you can add a little bit more. If you need to, worst case, if your hand slipped and you dumped a whole jar of salt in there, whole container or whatever, dump your cabbage into a colander, take it to the sink, rinse it off, and then just start over, right? All of these things can be undone and fixed.
So I want to know what happens if you pack your jar and it's not full? Is it more likely to mold, even if you can still get the brine up over the top?
If you're, you know, anywhere sort of in this range, I'd say it's fine. If you're like half or less, then I would use a smaller jar.
Great. What's your brine recipe or ratio, I guess?
Mm-hmm. You ready for this answer? Water and salt. There isn't a ratio. It's really, because again, it depends on how salty you want it. So I'm not saying this to be a pain in the butt. I'm saying it because I want you to try it and see what the answer is for you. If you are the kind of person that really needs a recipe and you're just not sure how to start, you can look online and find brine recipes. That stuff tends to get too exacting for me. I like the flexibility of being able to taste it and adjust it. So I don't care if this is a 2% brine or 2.5% brine, because it's more about how it tastes to me. But if you need a recipe, you can find those online. It'll give you ratios of how many teaspoons to use per, you know, amount of water or whatever. But really, you're just taking water. I like to use water that's a little bit warm. It doesn't have to be hot, but just something above cool. So it just helps the salt to dissolve a little bit easier. And then just start pinch at a time, pinch into the water, and then taste it. You also don't need to make very much brine. So you'd be surprised, it actually is going to hold less than you expect. You think, oh, it's a quart jar, I'm going to make a quart of brine. But really, there's so much vegetable in there. Even if you're packing it with cauliflower florets or garlic scapes or garlic cloves, there's less room in there than you think. So just make a little bit of brine, a cup or less, and just start pinch by pinch into the water and tasting it as you go until, again, it tastes a little bit saltier than what you want, and then you're good to go.
Is it best to use whole herbs and spices?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Great.
Yep.
Does it need to be kept away from sunlight? Yep, we mentioned no windowsills, but doesn't need to be complete darkness, just sort of out of direct sun.
Yeah.
More questions on how long you're going to leave this one out for, do you think, with cumin and onion?
So just like a regular sort of veggie ferment like this, honestly, I usually eat it out of the jar. A lot of my ferments don't make it to the fridge. Really, the only ones that make it to the fridge are sort of specialty ones that I make where I have some like kind of crazy combination that I want to make sure I preserve. This is just sort of, you know, I just kind of threw this one together. Not that you're not special, but there's nothing special about this one, right? It's not like the one I make in the spring with nettles and garlic scapes that I can only make in the spring when garlic scapes and nettles are available. I can make this anytime, so I usually just leave this out and eat from it. I'll start eating from it after about a week and then keep going until the jar's done.
Clean fork every time, right?
Yeah, clean fork. Yeah, you want anything that goes in needs to be clean. So no double dipping. Keep, you know, take out what you want to eat. But yeah, again, it's about tasting it and seeing what tastes good for you. You might love sauerkraut that's only fermented for a week. You also might start to notice that a week in the winter is like 2 days in the summer, and a week in the summer is like 2 months in the winter, right? Because the temperature is going to affect things. It depends on how warm your house is. So that's another reason why I don't like steadfast recipes, because there's so many variables, and it also so much depends on your preference, because again, you're the one eating it. So it needs to be at the flavor that you like, that's going to get you to finish eating it. Unless, of course, again, you're gifting this to someone and then you can stop it at whatever point you want. But in general, we're making these things for ourselves, right? So we want it to be done to our liking, and that can be at all sorts of various stages along the way.
Great. Maggie is fermenting along with us and is making a mixture of cabbage and carrot with a little bit of beet. It doesn't seem to be as wet as yours. Should I add more water, or brine? And yes, a little bit more salt.
Yeah, so first I would make sure that you have, well, yeah, if you've got carrots and beets, it's probably not going to be as wet. So yes, make sure that you've given it a really good massage. But if you've done that and it's still not wet enough, then yes, top it off with a little bit of water. With brine, yes.
Great. Lots of great questions coming in. So we'll just have a few minutes at the end for questions. Someone says, why is it necessary to pack it into the jar? And like you said, it pushes out the air bubbles and gets that brine up over the top.
Yeah.
I noticed that you keep touching your face. Will that affect the bacteria for the fermentation?
Yeah, I mean, lactic acid forming bacteria is everywhere, right? And so we don't need things to be sterile. That's actually one of the nice things about fermenting, which I like better than canning. Canning, everything has to be super sterile in order to prevent things from spoiling and going wrong. With this, it doesn't need to be that clean. So I like that flexibility because I always have glasses that are always slipping down my face, and this way I can push them up without worrying about my fermented food.
Yeah. And Krista is taking this jar home with her. It's her jar, so she can touch her face as much as she wants, right?
Yeah, but it's not going to affect things.
Yeah. No. And yes, the quart jar, the person that asked, we're using a quart this time, but if you have smaller amounts, you can definitely do smaller jars. Can you make soup from sauerkraut?
You can. The only thing about cooking, which is fine, you can totally cook with sauerkraut. It's delicious to cook with sauerkraut. I love sauerkraut and apples and sausage. It's delicious. But if you cook fermented products, it does kill off all of those good microbes, which is fine. It's not the only reason that we're eating it, but just know that. Yeah, but you definitely can cook with it.
Someone gave the comment of dill with mustard seed. What vegetables would you do with that combo?
You could do everything with that. You could do onions. That would be really good. You could do carrots. You could do radishes. You could do leeks. You could really do anything. Just even cabbage would be delicious.
Someone asked, so no cover on the jar, even if you use a leaf or a glass disc to keep the veggies down. She covered it up with a kitchen towel just because she's going to be bringing it home. We're going to probably put the lid on to get it home in the car, so still, but yeah, you cover it with a kitchen towel or rag or something to keep dust out. Yeah,
but so let's say you don't have the jar, but you have a leaf in there. You don't want to put the lid on because it is going to off-gas a little bit. These are not going to explode. This is not like if anyone's made kombucha and you have to, or any kind of like fermented alcoholic drink, you have to be worried about things exploding. This isn't going to be that reactive, but it is going to burp gas off essentially. And so lids are just going to get in the way of that process. And you don't need them on. So I just leave them off until it's time to put it on.
Can you combine fruit and veggies in a single ferment?
Yeah.
Awesome. Can you ferment prepackaged coleslaw mix? It's already got all the chopping done for you.
Sure.
Interesting. That's a good way. That's a good shortcut. I wouldn't have thought about that. It's already got the carrots and the cabbage.
Yeah, you definitely could.
Someone says, I agree. I love that fermentation does not require sterilization. Awesome. I mean, you don't want to be like dirty and disgusting, but yeah, you don't need to be sterilized. Sterilizing jars, yep, that's definitely better for canning, sterilizing. What are the best cucumbers to pickle, brine or dry fermentation?
So cucumbers, you would brine. I'll be honest. I have tried making fermented pickles and I've given up. I have never had good luck. I know that it can be done. I know there's people that do it. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. It's one of those things that I've just made my peace with that I am not going to make my peace with. And I have moved on from the world of trying to ferment pickles. It's just never given me a good product. And honestly, I'm not that great of a cucumber gardener, so I've never had surplus to keep experimenting with. But in general, you would use you'd add brine to those when you're making them.
Someone asked, are you going to show us something with less moisture, not needed, KNEAD, as in the brine method? Would you have 5 minutes to maybe show the brine method, or
sure. I mean, I can do. Yeah, I can do them right in here. I mean, it's literally taking the vegetable that you want. So let's do some carrot coins.
someone says, everyone has their Waterloo in terms of your pickle conundrum.
Yeah, thank you. That makes me feel better.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to know when to give up.
Yeah, I've tried them once or twice, and every time they go super squishy and slimy. And I know there's all those things about like add tannins, add oak leaves, and every time I'm just like, it's not worth it when I can get pickles from someone that knows what they're doing.
Yeah, that's kind of what I feel like too.
So we'll hang in for just a few more minutes. I know we're a little bit past 7 at this point, but we'll see the demo of the brine portion, and then if anybody has any last minute questions, I see there's a few left in the chat that I'll ask in a minute, but this is sort of your 5-minute warning for if anybody has any further questions for Krista. And like I said, I will send out an email when it is posted on our website, which will be after a little bit. Belinda wants to know, what types of fruit and veggie mixes would you ferment? Have you made a mixed one before that you would like to share?
Asking me?
Yeah.
Oh goodness, I've shared a bunch.
I guess technically like peppers are fruits, so the hot sauce was a fruit veggie.
Oh, a fruit and vegetable
One
combo.
that's a mix, yeah, of a fruit and a veggie.
Sometimes I've done dried fruit before, so I've done like raisins and things, which have been interesting, like a carrot raisin one. And then the raisins get kind of tangy. I don't do a lot of fruit mixed in. You could do something like fermented plums. That would be really delicious. And then tomatoes are also technically fruit. Let me think about that. Other examples of fruit and...
It's almost like chutneys, right? So you could do like plum and onion, and that would be like a...
Yeah, that would be really good.
Sulfury, fruity chutney sort of thing.
Yeah.
There's mango pickles, right? Like mango and onion or mango and carrot.
You could even do like a green mango. Oh. Like a green papaya. The thing with fruit though is you have to be careful. It's sort of like beets where you don't want to do too much fruit because then it just turns into booze, which could be fun too, but it's not going to give you that acidic flavor that you want. It's going to give you a alcoholic flavor, which is acidic, but it's different. You know what I mean? So that's why I use a little bit of fruit, but I don't use a ton of it. So that's why I don't have a bunch of ideas off the top of my head. But yeah, dried fruit can be fun to play around with. I'm just going to do all of this. So carrots, I did a pinch of salt.
Run over to the sink real fast. And again, if your tap water is heavily chlorinated,
and then water.
Yep.
And that's it. And then, so you could do the brine separate. You could do the salt and the water in another container. I don't happen to have one right in front of me, and I'm just kind of throwing this together for you, so I just put it all together. But you could do that separate and then try it. I just tossed this all together. Again, I've done this long enough. I know a pinch of salt is going to be about right, and then it's a little bit too salty, which is perfect. And then I would just, what's nice about these carrots is that they actually sort of wedge them. You can kind of wedge them in the jar so that they are keeping themselves submerged. So I would honestly not even put anything on top of that because it's just gonna, those are all covered, and then that's it. And then you've got carrots. And there's a little bit of salt on the bottom, which is fine. That'll dissolve, and it's really that simple.
That's how I did my carrots the other day. They've been going for about a week. They look awesome.
Yeah.
Great. A couple more questions for you at the last few minutes. I've not eaten many fermented products, only store-bought kraut a few times. Is there a pre-made product you'd suggest starting with to see if I like that flavor? Depends on, I guess, where you are. Because I know we carry a lot of like really great fermenty stuff at the co-op. We have a lot of different krauts like local, pitchfork, and flat family. Kimchi is spicy, so if you're a spicy fan, kimchi is great to get that spicy and the funky. Do you have any other ones that you really like and enjoy?
I mean, that's it. Here's the other thing. If you're buying it at the store, and again, like Carrie said, you know, depending on where you are, you might not have access to sort of like nice, small, artisanal batch ferments. What you don't want to do, I'll say this, you don't want to buy the stuff that is shelf stable that you can buy at the grocery store. So there is sauerkraut that you can buy in a can that's shelf stable, sold in the grocery aisles. So that stuff has been pasteurized in order to make it shelf stable and canned, right? Which is not what we're talking about. That's not what we're doing here. So they did ferment it, but then they can it, and that just kills the flavor. It does not taste the same as making it yourself. So if you're going to start with a product and you find something at the store, make sure that you're buying it from the refrigerated section. That's going to be a product that's live, that's got living microorganisms in it. And that's going to be more authentic to the kind of flavor that you would get by making it yourself at home. So if you are local to the co-op here, or you have a co-op near you, find one like that that's made for you. Avoid the stuff in the grocery aisle, and that can be a good introduction.
For grated carrots, do I do it like the sauerkraut and try to get liquid out of it and massage it, or with brine?
For like grated carrots, texture. Massaging is not going to really do a whole lot. You're still going to have to add. You're still going to have to add brine to those.
Great. Last couple of questions coming in, and then we'll wrap things up. There are 2 wild fermentation groups on Facebook. Do you mean with the ones with the lemons or the jars in the cover picture? Which one do you know what the cover picture of the one you tend to hit looks like?
I have absolutely no idea.
All right.
I don't know, to be totally honest with you.
They might both be good.
2, yeah, I was going to say, if there's 2 with the same name, then that shows you the demand for this. Try joining them both. I don't honestly know. I did not realize there were 2, so I don't know what the cover image of that is.
A lot of people saying, thank you so much. This was so great, so informative. How long until the carrots that you just did would you let them go? People are really curious about your timings.
Yeah, typically stuff that's less cut up. So this is more cut up, right? And then this is less cut up. And things that are denser, so carrots and garlic, cauliflower, those are going to take longer to ferment, just to change the texture of this whole piece of carrot. Couple weeks, wintertime, honestly, I usually stuff these in the corner and wait a month and kind of forget about them. I prefer older ferments typically. I like that more complex flavor. So I usually make them and sort of leave them, but you could try them in a week. They're going to have changed flavor in a week.
And then yes, she just is going to cover that with a towel. There's no weight because, like she said, the wedges of the carrots have sort of held themselves down under the liquid. They don't need a weight. But yeah, you could put another weight on top if you needed. Yeah, the little jar does not seal up like the cabbage completely. Yep, exactly. Are the ferments acidic in your gut?
No.
Acid. Okay. All right, beets need brine, yes, because beets, again, are not going to make liquid when you squeeze the heck out of them like cabbage will. Yeah. So it'll be a brine thing. Awesome. That is the last question in the chat for now. That's people just saying thank you. Thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you again for your patience with getting started a little bit late. But again, it's so great to sort of have this sense of community, even if we have people from all over who maybe have never been to the co-op. It's great to have a little sense of community within this class. So thank you all so much for joining us. I'm going to say good night and we're going to end the event, but I will let people know when the recording is up. Thank you all. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.